Steve, we're glad you're here.
Thank you.
I'm going to provide a sort of flattering introduction for you momentarily, but I want to just dive in initially. You are a JD MBA. Many people here are MBAs. If you could only choose one, JD or MBA, which one would it be and why?
That's a really tough question. You know, when I went to school, I wanted to be a constitutional lawyer, and I went to business school only because my family had a women's retail business back in Michigan, and my 4 brothers and cousins knew fashion. I was supposed to do the numbers, so I was just there out of family obligation, and always wanted to be a lawyer. But the business school has been probably more useful day to day in my career. And the law school has probably been more useful in just thinking about society and where my career fits into society. So I really love both of them. I support both schools, and I'm going to evade the answer.
We got a politician up here. Okay. Well, Steve, as you have a full bio in your program, I want to flag a few things to just mark his extraordinary career. So he's currently the founder and CEO of New Mountain Capital, private equity firm here just down the road in New York City with over $15 billion under management. Before starting New Mountain, he had a long and storied career at Goldman Sachs, the leveraged buyout group, working on all sorts of novel and different kinds of transactions. He then spent 15 years with Forsman Little and served as the most senior partner outside of the family office that it was in overseeing their private equity and debt partnerships for over $10 billion in capital deployed. As may have already come up, is a BA in economics and political philosophy with high honors from the University of Michigan. He received his both MBA and JD from Harvard, University of Cambridge, I believe, the little school up the road. And then he also serves as chairman or director for numerous corporations and philanthropies. And lastly, but not least, Steve is married to Maureen, and they together have several children. I believe two of them joining us today. So anyway, quick round of applause. Welcome. Thank you guys for the family for being here. So I want to dive right in because you are one of these sort of market maker, kingpin guys that in the last 10 years have received a lot of flack that you give money to Republicans just to keep your personal taxes low. You have no thoughts about the jobs of all these people who are getting lost in these companies that you're moving around. Give us a little picture of has it been rough? Has it been rough to be who you are in this business in the last 10 years for how people think about your business?
Well, it hasn't been rough in that sense. I do think there's a lot of anger and bad feeling about business in general, about anything connected to finance in particular. And so, for example, one of the things that I started doing, because I am sensitive to it and just kind of feel it in the air, is after Lehman Brothers went down in 2008, I asked my firm to start compiling a social dashboard that nobody asks us to do. We just do it every year and update it and keep it going on the most common sense things. So if you look at the last one, just our firm, which is not the biggest firm in the world, has added or created over 19,800 jobs, net of any job losses at our companies, pay way more than the national average because these are high growth, high margin businesses, have spent over $2.7 billion in R&D and software and CapEx, have never had a bankruptcy, have never missed an interest payment. So, we think we can show, and no one asked us to do it. I wanted my kids to know it. I wanted anyone who does business with us to know it. And we keep that updated every year just because I think there is a negative feeling, and it's important to be able to explain what you do and why you do it.
And talk a little about the origin of that. I think it was right around the fall of Lehman. What was the context that led you to, it's important to note, this was not a change of your business model. You're doing this all along, but why did you want to produce it?
Well, yeah, it's not a change of our business model. The whole name of my firm, New Mountain, we're nice flat Manhattan, and we're not mountain climbers, has to do with the idea of building new mountains in the industries where we invest. And if you look at our website, it says one thing, New Mountain, building great businesses. We've started businesses, we bought existing businesses and accelerated them. I'm the head of the growth capital wing of my industry. And so that's always been the model. But frankly, after 2008 with Lehman, and there was just so much anger in the country, it just felt important to be on record explaining what we do. And hopefully all of you in your own careers and whatever business you're at will be able to explain on the back of an envelope to yourself, your kids, your friends, who's ever coming after you with a pitchfork, why you do what you do and why it's a good thing. And if you can't explain it, you should maybe think, well, why isn't that I can't explain it? Because you should be able to explain it, I believe.
I know you're very involved in what's been, I know when I was at Harvard, there was a lot of renewed energy on the Social Enterprise Club, lots of conversations about business at the bottom of the pyramid, double bottom line, triple bottom line. I don't know how many you can have, but it gets really long at some point. Talk about, there's some probably unfair criticism of that those are basically statists that are trying to roll out their vision of big government through companies focused on things that don't generate profits. Talk about your dashboard and how it fits in that conversation.
Well, yeah, so I was on the board of Harvard Business School Social Enterprises for a number of years. I'm on other things, like my wife and I have endowed a professor of leadership and progress at the law school, and I'm the head of the public equity policy group for the Kennedy School. But I actually don't love the idea of double bottom line, because I think every enterprise, every business enterprise where you treat other people respectfully, you're doing something mutually and you're serving a need that they want. If you're serving the need that other people want in a respectful way, I think you are, since society is made up of people, you're helping society. So if you're in the world's greatest mom t-shirt business and you make the mom and the kid who gave the t-shirt happy, I mean, that is a social that is social value to those two people. So I think the way you describe what you're doing for the world, if you really had an accurate machine, which there is none, you'd really figure out how much value you added to all the people you've dealt with. That's very hard to calculate, but that's really what you should be trying to calculate. And I think, if you're all sitting on chairs, if chairs vanished today and all the chair companies were put out of business, the best new charity in the world would be, we create chairs. We are the Chair Society of America, and you don't have to do it because someone else has already done it and didn't just do it, but said exactly what type of chair do you want, how soft should it be, how hard should it be. Companies are up day and night trying to figure out what their customers want and how to please them. So I don't think it's an invisible hand of greed. I think it's a very visible hand of trying to serve the interests of the people you're serving. And that, to me, is inherently a social enterprise, since you're serving people and society's made up out of people.
Marilyn shared a line last night that I had not heard but found terrifying, and it stayed with me. I believe quoting Bernie Sanders recently, who said, "The business model of Wall Street is fraud." Curious, so in light of...
That's why I do a social dashboard. That's exactly right.
You've made this dashboard of creating tens of thousands of jobs and massive economic value, and yet it seems like pretty mainstream belief about Wall Street is that it is a place based on fraud and bad, wrong dealings.
Right. Well, first of all, unfortunately, there has been fraud with a guy like Bernie Madoff, who is, just obviously the most visible part of fraud. There has been poor judgment with, a firm like Bear Stearns, which went down, that friends and family used to work at, went down because they made bad decisions. I think it was driven by government policy forcing people into subprime loans, but then bad decisions followed. So there has been that type of thing, but I think it's very important, what you worry about is just a prejudice setting in, like any other type of prejudice. And how do you fight prejudice? It's really hard. And the only way you can fight prejudice, I think, is facts and constantly talking about it and being able to stand up and defend yourself. I frankly think Mitt Romney did a terrible, terrible job of defending what I do for a living, and he was running for president and didn't do it. So, but it's a real problem, and I do worry about it.
Well, here's a related riddle for you. So it sort of seems like leading candidates of the party that says that Wall Street is based on fraud made $150 million in speaking fees paid by the leaders of Wall Street. Help unpack this riddle that it seems like, on the one hand, Democratic Party really beats up on Wall Street, but the CEOs of most of the banks and their leadership are huge donors and supportive of the people that don't like them.
Well, and I think I think many, many people who work on Wall Street are sincere Democrats. The idea of Wall Street of being a bunch of greedy thugs, I really don't think it's right. It's a lot of people who are the president of their high school or the athlete in their college or whatever. It's just a bunch of well-meaning, well-intended people who are trying to help the world and think that they are. And, I think it's a shock to some of them that they're being, as ostracized as they are, and it's just, it's I think a problem that Democrats have.
I know an interest of yours, and I'd love maybe you to help cast a vision for some of these guys in a way that I certainly can't, is that they think about their business as being in the business of ideas, or that their business matters. Can you talk what you mean by that, and then help us understand that?
Well, what I really believe is that the world, how did we go from 100,000 years ago, when we were a species walking around in the grass with nothing, to having Mozart concertos and helicopters and skyscrapers and whatever else we have that we think is good in the world? It came from creative organization. Someone put a seed into the dirt and that led to more, and then someone put water with the seed in the dirt and that led to more, and then someone put holes in a stick and that led to a pipe, and someone moved their fingers and that led to a song. So everything that's come of the last 150,000 years is through creative organization of ideas and people and things. And everybody does it in different ways. I think the most powerful, certainly one of the most powerful ways to do it is through business, because what business basically means is it's a mutual voluntary transaction. You don't have guns, you don't have a police force, you don't have an army, 51 can't compel the other 49 to do something. You have to do something that the other person wants you to do voluntarily that's good for them. And also, unlike a charity where you're endowing Albanian opera because you like Albanian opera, you also have to prove that you've created more value than you burned up in doing it. That you can call it profit or you call it surplus, whatever you want. So it's an inherently a good act. And if it's a creative act to paint a picture of a farm, isn't it also a creative act to create the farm? And if it's a creative act to make a sculpture of an airplane in a gallery, isn't it also a creative act to create the airplane that flies across the ocean safely, energy efficient, and the factories and supply chain and technology labs and everything in this giant organization that does it? To me, these are giant creative acts of positive organization. It's not some greedy action that incidentally somehow turned out well for people. It's the most visible, intentional, creative form in the most voluntary, respectful way. That's how I think business should be thought about. And the far right doesn't talk about it that way because they say, hey, we can do whatever the heck we want, and Adam Smith said it's okay. He didn't say that. I've been reading Adam Smith for the last few weeks again. He did not say that. And nor is it everyone's a crook. And so I think you have to think of your life that whatever you do, you're here, you're now, you're going to try to make things better, and hopefully, you'll do it. And the bigger you do it, the better it is, in my opinion.
And for folks here who are heading into banking or private equity, what you just said, what does that mean for them? We're all young, we'd be heading in as junior people. What does that practically mean for how we should think about our jobs?
Yeah, so the question was asked before, hey, if you start in banking or consulting, how do you ever get on the right path? I think that is there's lots of right paths. I think everybody can have a right path. And, for example, my own firm in private equity hires specifically out of banking and consulting. And I have friends who were consultants for 20 years and then went off and started or ran businesses and do that, or bankers who go off and do what they do, or as bankers are incredibly creative organizing forces as bankers where they're helping good things get done. So, I kind of believe that there's a path for, every individual person, whatever that path is, just do it right, do it creatively, add as much value as you can, don't cheat people, and you'll be fine. And there's lots of ways to, life evolves on. I frankly think, I frankly think there's almost too much pressure on business students today to start a business the day they leave school. And, that may be too soon, frankly. Sometimes it's not a bad thing to train a little bit on somebody else's dime, really learn the industry, become great at it, and then start your own. So, I came out of school, went to Goldman, did start their LBO group because it was such a new idea. Nobody else wanted to start it. Nobody else knew what one was. And then had 20 years there and with Force Little. And then I started my own firm, 15, 16 years ago. I could not have started New Mountain the day I left graduate school. It would have just not worked.
And I just want to flag there that you did go to Goldman and you started a group there, right? So do you think, can you be entrepreneurial in?
Well, that's the other thing, yes. What happened with me is I was maybe the youngest person at the business school. I had no work experience. I was totally not proper to be hired in anything else. There was a better student than me in everything else. And the first leverage buyout of a public company happened when I was in graduate school, where KKR bought a New York Stock Exchange company and took it private. So I wrote my law and business school thesis on it. And when I went to Goldman Sachs, I said, I want to be your LBO expert. They said, well, that's great. We've never done an LBO. You can be the expert. So it's like saying, I want to be your wheat farmer on the moon. Oh, fine. You're the wheat farmer on the moon. And you know, and it was like going to Silicon Valley the day transistors were invented and saying, hey, I'd like to be a transistor guy. Okay, do transistor. So, you know, and then don't forget, there were 20 years. If you look, I started in 1981. Look at the S&P from 1981 to the year 2000 and say, hey, was that a good time to start? That was a very good time. 20 years straight up. So anyways, but on the question, but within Goldman Sachs, I started in mergers. I was happy to survive the 120-hour weeks, and then I was able to be co-founder of the Buyout group, which was great, and then was able to be recruited away when there were, you know, KKR was a $400 million fund, and Forsman was 220, and those were the two giants of the industry. So, you know, a lot of the ideas you have, if you're at, you know, what we do at New Mountain Strategies, you take an existing company that's doing well and transform it upward. And some of the best new ideas you have it may be nice to have a well-capitalized base with clients, with economies of scale, and add your idea to that versus starting totally, you know, with no support anywhere and trying to beat that installed base. So I think you can be very creative within an existing company.
Well, just to flag, I know in a few minutes we'll be taking questions, but two last things I want to chat with you briefly about. Number one is sort of as a family, your sort of artistic and creative endeavors, which seem very exciting and interesting, and then also your work in charter schools and education. So yeah. Start with that first one. So what I love is that you do see that your business is about defending good ideas, and also you guys invest a lot of time and money in really creative, interesting things outside of that. Tell us about some of those.
Well, first of all, on being creative, I'm very proud of my wife, who has a book you may have read about called Opening Bell, which is actually selling lots and lots of copies. So I'm married to somebody who's creative, which is, you know, a great honor for me. And as far as things we've done creatively outside of business, to me it's all a continuum. So the best example for life model, I think, is someone like Ben Franklin, so I think you should aspire to be, who was a great business person and started the library and the fire department, and, you know, was just creative across all things. You know, in my own small way, you know, I was able to set up the first charter school in the state of New York 15 or 16 years ago, took a year off of that. I'm doing a philanthropy now that I'm driving called Freshman Year for Free, where we're teamed up with Harvard and MIT, and we're putting, you guys all know MOOCs, you know, the great massively open online courses, which are better than what people are paying for thousands of dollars for online courses, but you can't get any credit. So it's like they give you a free Mercedes-Benz, but they won't give you a key. It's a pretty frustrating thing for students. So what I'm doing is, working with Harvard and MIT, we're commissioning 35 or 36 great courses in one for every freshman subject, be available free to anyone in the world, like a public library of freshman year of college with free textbooks. But what I've done is match up with the advanced placement tests, and there's something called the CLEP test if you're out of high school, so that once you pass the course, you pay $80, you pass the College Board AP or CLEP test, and then you do get credit. So you can effectively get your entire freshman year for free if you want to. And, you know, that's something. So the same week, you know, President Obama announced the $80 billion reform of community colleges. You know, we're doing this, you know, privately, and we'll be done, and we'll actually do it. I mean, it'll be done very soon. So that's what I think a private individual can do. And, you know, you don't have to. I actually did try to change the accreditation system. I went down to the Department of Ed, and I went through all the meeting rooms, and I said, I'm not going to live long enough. I just can't. You know, this is going to take forever, and I'm just going to do it. So we figured out a way to just do it.
And if charter schools really work, lay out a vision for, like, why should we be excited about this, and what would be the implications for the country be if they really worked?
Well, the truth is they really do work. And certainly they work. You know, they don't work because they're called charter schools. It's like restaurants. I mean, you know, if you've always had to eat at the state cafeteria and get fish sticks every day of your life for 100 years, and then they said, by the way, we will let people create their own restaurants, and you can go there instead of the state cafeteria. Some will have ptomaine poisoning and should be shut down, and some will be Le Bernardin, you know, and will be great. And that's how charter schools work. It's just a chance for entrepreneurial energy to get into the system. And so the good ones are really great. In the New York City, there's all the Stanford studies and the Harvard studies that they do outperform, and they're wonderful. And there's just so much political opposition. It's still a battle, but they do work, and hopefully they'll overcome the entrenched political opposition.
Well, let's do this. I have one quick final question, but please, as you guys have questions, go ahead and form lines at either side here on these microphones, and we'll turn to that. A little bit on the spot, because your family is here. Just curious, some of us are married, starting to have kids. How do you guys as a family, how do you involve your kids? How do you guys think about what's important and what you do as a family together?
Well, first of all, we have 2 of the 4 kids. I will say the toughest debates I have in economics, and the guy who stumps me the most is my 8th grade son, Owen, who's here today, who, if you want to know the counter of some of my arguments, just go talk to Owen. And I have my daughter Ella here, who's fantastic, who's equally bright. So it's just a wonderful thing to have a family. And obviously, you talk about creative acts that are wonderful. My proudest is with Marina and I having the family. So it's just a great thing.
Yeah. My oldest is 6, and he's starting. I still win the arguments right now, but it's not.
Wait, give it a few years.
It's not going to last that much longer. All right. So the way we're going to do this is your name and school and a question. Questions in with a question mark, and your voice kind of goes up at the end in case you need to be reminded of how that works. Yeah, go ahead.
Frank Sampino from the Cox School at Southern Methodist. You guys talked about in the beginning the reputation of Wall Street and everything. And I was wondering if I could get your reaction to something I've been thinking about, which is rent-seeking in business and on Wall Street. Obviously, in capitalism, competition is good, but in business, when the rubber hits the road, you don't want competition, and a lot of companies try to use the government to lock out competitors through regulations and whatnot. So I wonder if that kind of stuff gives Wall Street a bad reputation, or if that plays into it.
Well, look, I am a big opponent to crony capitalism, and so when I talk about the creative act of voluntary enterprise between people, that is not the same as getting the government to go beat up people on your behalf. That to me is just another form of government action where you get the gun power on your side, which is not, to me, not a good thing. So I think there's way too much of it. I think, frankly, the reason college tuition is so high is because it's supply constrained because of the accreditation process. You can only give a degree if you're accredited by very few bodies. And it keeps in, and if you have under a certain price, you break the 90-10 rule. It's incredibly ornate why it's so expensive. And so I think it's a problem. I think it's it's just another form of government abuse, in my opinion.
Mm. Yeah. Well, this means I get to keep him in the hot seat. All right, as there are other questions, do please come on up. So talk about that question of crony capitalism. In my research and coming to understand more about big Republican forces, the Chamber of Commerce, et cetera, crony capitalism, there are pretty good arguments that it is pretty widespread. Do you share that belief?
I guess I would share that belief, yeah.
And what's a way out of that?
Smaller, more limited government and more private action and less government action.
Yeah.
And I think, frankly, a lot of things that are accused of being, on the other hand, I think a lot of things that are accused of government takeover, of private sector takeover of the government is just the opposite. I think a lot of lobbying is defensive lobbying, where the stronger the government's getting, where they're about to attack your industry, all the lobbying accelerates to try to just defend against the attack. And that all of this stuff that people don't like would go away if it was just fewer laws when you really need them, instead of everything being regulated all the time or about to be regulated.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, my name's Ben. I'm from the University of Pennsylvania. Personally, what emerging markets or opportunities are you excited about?
Talk about on geographic emerging markets or industry emerging markets?
Both.
Well, my firm is primarily U.S. headquartered companies where what we can do is help them sell more around the world. So for example, we bought a laboratory chemicals business located in Pennsylvania, and then we bought the Indian sister, so now we can have the highest quality manufacturing of generic drugs in Panoli, India, and we built the U.S. standard plant in India. So there are emerging market opportunities. I'm not myself really the one going around trying to be just in emerging markets. We think that's a growth to the U.S. And then for industry markets, we come up with a phrase we call defensive growth. What are the niches of the economy that can keep growing, whether the macros are good or bad? So we're doing a lot in healthcare IT, where we're trying to make the healthcare system more efficient, technology-enabled business services where you do something that was already done at a much lower cost in a much better way. One business I have, which is, I don't know if it's crony capitalism or the opposite, we bought the leading consultant to keep private equity and hedge funds in compliance with the SEC and FINRA and AFMD. So if Bernie ever is president, I'll be out of business, but this will be just an incredibly valuable company. So I'm going to move and be an employee of this business because it's just trying to keep everybody honest and so forth. And you can look at our website on the things we're buying, but it's kind of technology-enabled services.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, Ben.
I'm Ben from Stanford. One of the things I've noticed is that in groups like this and people at business school, we're very optimistic and see that change is a good thing, and we kind of want to move from the status quo. But it seems to me that the rest of the population, whether the Republican, Democrat, or otherwise, is very happy with the status quo. They don't see the possibilities of the future, and regulation seems to be driven to help protect the downside. And I think a lot of regulations, and I'm from the military, so I've seen kind of the encroachment of government in how we do national security, is focused on mitigating the downside. So how do we shape a narrative and tell a story that will motivate the massive people to understand the progress of technology?
I think a lot of the problem with business is that it doesn't explain itself what it really does. So, if you go to any good undergrad, there is art appreciation courses. There's now architecture appreciation courses, so you understand not only is it a pretty building, but it's energy efficient and it has certain structural dynamics that are brilliant, and look how it goes with the neighborhood. So people understand that. They don't really understand the aesthetic quality of what's being done to create a business to business. You make the supply chain more efficient by 15%. No one understands that that's an achievement at all. And so, and I think a lot of the animosity people have is, if you see Derek Jeter make a lot of money, but you watched him play baseball and said, wow, that guy's a great shortstop and look how he hit, you accept it. If he goes into the locker room and you don't know what he did and he walks out with a big paycheck, you assume he just robbed you, right? So I think it's the lack of transparency, the lack of explanation. Some of what the most conservative libertarian side does is totally counterproductive, because they say, it's none of your business how I made the money, and if I'm greedy, it's just going to work to your way somehow or other, which to me is exactly not the answer. The answer is I'm busting my tail day and night to serve you, my fellow people on the other side of the transaction, and here's how we do it, and here's how we made it better. So it's not, yes, I'm a crook, or no, not your business if I'm a crook. It's a visible hand of trying to do things better. And this is what we did. And so I think that's the biggest issue.
Thanks.
Let's do, are there three, just maybe two? Let's do these together. Can you guys do them back to back, and then we'll let them swing it back?
I don't know if I have as good a memory as Evan does to remember all the credit.
Good morning, I'm Jim Royce from Georgetown McDonough. Thank you both. Given that we haven't, as a society, solved the problem of too big to fail, if anything, it's more likely to recur in the coming years, are there any common sense solutions that are consistent with a capitalist ideology to reduce that likelihood of the interconnected failure in the future? Thanks.
Yeah. You want me to answer that?
Yeah, let's do one more, and then we'll swing it both if you can.
Thank you. Sudipta here from the Wharton chapter. Yesterday, Marilyn Fidek led us off by, in her talk, saying that capitalism is moral. You are starting up you've started up a charter school. Just as our friends at the Federalist Society talk about the 50 states being an experiment in democracy, capitalism is an experiment for the best ideas to rise to the top, but that also means that some of them fail. How do you square the idea that capitalism is moral with opponents who say that charter schools are an experimentation on our kids, and some of them we might be failing some of them?
Yeah, all right, well, let me take both questions. First of all, I don't consider myself a banking expert. I'm buying and owning traditional companies. I do think on the too big to fail, a lot of it was driven by bad federal policy, but that being said, the investment banks that were failing, I think were inherently poorly structured, where they were borrowing short-term and lending long. I mean, the ability for all the money to get pulled out from the prime accounts, from repos, they couldn't control their financing in a panic, and so being backed up by the Fed as bank holding companies is, to me, the ultimate safety factor on that. I'm not sure it was a good idea for Glass-Steagall to be repealed. It may be safer, it wasn't, but I don't have deep opinions because I haven't really studied it. On charter schools and why is it moral to experiment with the kids, and there's a book called A Light Shines in Harlem about the school I started, which, if you download it, you'll be the one person who did. So, but it actually goes into the whole thing.
Your wife has sold a lot more books.
My wife
is
has
that
sold,
right?
yeah, I have
Like,
to,
just for the record.
I bow to my wife in many
Okay.
things, including
good.
her books are much more popular than this thing that was about me, but, and a better written book. The answer, my partner in that was Wyatt T. Walker, who was Martin Luther King's chief of staff, who led the Birmingham Civil Rights March. He's an icon in civil rights. He had been a minister in Harlem since '66. And you want it, year after year after year of schools failing in the neighborhood for the kids that never would do well. And the parents chose, and I was there in the summer in the basement of the school personally saying, look, we don't have our teachers yet. We don't have a gymnasium. It's an experiment. Give us a shot. They made the experiment. We, did 2 or 3 times the scores of the surrounding schools. Success Academy has gone on. I was the first one 16 years ago. There's now, bigger, better groups of doing them. But the reason you experiment is what you have is failing and it can never stop. So you've been eating the rotten fish sticks for 100 years in the state cafeteria and someone says, hey, I'm opening a new restaurant. You want to try it? Yes. And that was the answer because I know what I had wasn't working. So that's what got us to get people to join a charter school that had no existence.
Well, Steve, as little peons in the fight for capitalism, it's fun to have a capable giant in the space who's out there on the front lines articulating a moral defense of investing and business, and doing so at home around the breakfast table and in books and films. And thank you.
Well, thank you. My son's at Wharton as a freshman, so I'm thrilled to see people from Wharton and the other great business schools. And thank you all very, very much.
Cool. Thank you. Hey, take one.